All right, welcome back to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital. I'm so excited to have another unicorn founder from YC. I'm with Michel Tricot from Airbyte. Michel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for having me and glad to be there.
Yeah, thank you. So we're both French. We're obviously recording in English. I was trying to pronounce your name. It's a French name anyway. So we got it out of the way. Now it's only uphill from here. So for those who don't know Airbyte and for those who don't know you, I think a lot of people actually do. But the very few who don't, please introduce yourself and introduce Airbyte.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CEO and I'm the co-founder of Airbyte. And so I've been working in the data space for almost 15 years now. And I really started in the days of Hadoop, HDFS, like all the big data processing. And bit by bit, the universe of data has changed. And I started to see like a real pain point on every single data team that I was working with and working at. And yeah, 2020 with my co-founder started to build Airbyte. And our goal with Airbyte is to build this what we call a data movement platform. So this ability to break down any kind of data silo that you might have. So if you have data somewhere, our goal is to make that data available and to make it actionable. So available means we break down the silo. Actionable means you can actually extract value from that data. And that's the whole purpose of the company. And our goal now is, yeah, let's break down silos, let's touch data, and let's make it actionable.
Amazing.
And
And it seems you're, oh, sorry, you wanted to add something?
uh, yeah, man. One thing is we also like a very strong open source presence, so massive adoption across data engineers, data teams, engineering teams, and that's been a pretty fun journey, and I love to talk about it.
Well, yeah, I have so many questions also with open source because I do think YC is doing more and more of open source. I mean, they've always done it, but now I think they're doing more. And there's always this question of monetization. So we can get to that, but I want to address the elephant in the room, or actually the unicorn in the room. So you started only in 2020. You're a unicorn, and actually you've been for a time. You became a unicorn in 2021, end of 21, 2022. I'm sure. No, I'm not sure. I'm going to ask you: are you tired of being just called a unicorn and defined? Because unicorn is just how much you raise the valuation. Actually, you're really building a product for customers. Is it a good or a bad thing to be such a quick unicorn?
So I never use the word unicorn myself to define myself or to define Airbyte. As you said, like we started in 2020, but we really launched Airbyte in 2021. So everything went very fast. There was a lot of community growth, but at the end of the day, what matter is not like being a unicorn is not a milestone. Like doing a fundraising is not a milestone. It's just how you get to your next actual milestone. And your milestone is generally going to be what customer are you acquiring? What features are you delivering? How you making your customer happy and successful? And that's why I try to stay away from that word because I always look at it as a more like a vanity title. And yeah,
It is,
I
yeah. But the problem is you don't even think about it. I get that, and I think that's smart and healthy. But everybody else, including me, I'm doing what I. Everybody else is projecting that on you. How do you deal with that? And does it change a lot of things?
not really, honestly. For me, it's just you have the friend you have the team you have, and as long as everyone is the thing is, people can call me that. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's like, do I am I anchored on in the real world? Because one thing that you read a lot in the news, and that's why I want to stay away from this kind of like ego boosting type of title is lot of people they become a unicorn and suddenly like yeah let's go crazy and that's not who I am. It's not who the company is. Like our goal is just build the best product and get the best customers.
Very cool. I
But
love that.
yes, it definitely changes the perception that people have of you, but as long as you remain honest with yourself and realistic, everything goes well.
Incredibly down to earth and super refreshing. Thank you and congrats for keeping this sort of healthy attitude. Before we dive in, I want to ask you about the dangers of maybe growing so quickly. But before, I want to ask you, tell us the story. What happened? You launched in 21, you become a unicorn, even though you don't want to go into the vanity, but it means people, smart, professional investors value you over $1 billion. Like that's huge.
Yeah.
99% of every startups in the world never make it there. So what's the journey? And of course, you've been pushed or carried with open source, but that's not it. There's much, much more. How was it? I think I read an interview from you where you said it felt like you were running in front of a fast train. Go back and tell us how everything was and felt and how it happened.
Yeah. So actually, if you go back to the beginning of Airbyte, it used to be called a very different name, which was a terrible name, but we're not going to talk about, actually, yes, it's what's called Backstarity. It was awful. But
Airbyte is better.
it's way better. But really what happened is we started in January 2020. And the first 3 months, we went through YC, did a few pivots along the way. And we had a product that was working decently. It was called Data Line. We had already renamed ourselves at the time. And then you have COVID who start. And suddenly, the whole world goes on pause for a few months. And for us as founder, like with Jean, my co-founder, we were looking at the product where we had all this initial signal of adoption and suddenly boom, no one is answering the phone, no one is on LinkedIn chatting with us, no one is replying to email, and no investors wants to talk to anyone in the startup ecosystem. And when you build a company like that, you're going to put your soul into it. You're going to put all your energy. And I remember having this long walk with my co-founder in the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And both of us were chatting. And at some point we said, man, I don't want to build what we call a vitamin. I want to build a real painkiller. So
Mm.
I'm going to make it feel like less dramatic than it was at the time. But if a global pandemic can break your product, like, what are you building? Like you want to build, I mean, especially for me, I want to build something that can sustain any kind of like worldwide event. And at that point, we just say, okay, let's kill the original idea and let's go back to the drawing board. And that's really when we came back to this initial like infrastructure, like you have no choice but to continue to use it if you want to continue to build a good business that leverages data. And that's when we went and started to build Airbyte. And very, very quickly, we released the first project at the time. It was actually pretty bad, but we actually like the value we were delivering from day one was a real pain that every single user that is working with data had, which is I don't want to maintain any kind of data pipeline. This is not what I'm here to do. What I want to do is just extract value out of it. I don't want to build the pipes. That's not interesting. And yeah, very quickly we started to grow the community. We started to grow usage. And really, I think we hit the biggest wall that, when you say we were running in front of the train, that really happened in June 2021, where we had what, eight, nine people at the time at the company. And we basically were unable to do any kind of product development or any work because the community was just too engaged. It's a good problem to have, but we were getting like thousands of people just trying to download Airbyte, trying to get it installed, trying to make it work. And they were just telling us about all these issues that they had. And that's really the point where the idea we always had with Airbyte is doing this type of pipes. It's a ubiquity game, meaning that what if we can make this work that is done and repeated across many teams? What if we can just crowdsource this work, make it so that teams are sharing the work with other teams so that they don't have to build it. And once it's built once, everyone has access to it. And that started to really work in 2021. So I would say that was really inception of how we got to Airbyte and to where it is. It's solving this real pain that every user in the data space has and solving and making it a ubiquitous solution.
It's super interesting. Many questions I want to ask you about open source again, but I also read, I was reading a few articles to prepare for this, and I realized, first of all, your product, once it's plugged in, it's super sticky. No one wants to redo the pipes so once it's plugged in, most likely it's going to stay here forever. That's what made Microsoft's fortune or Bill Gates' fortune. It's just once you start using Microsoft, you're never going out of Microsoft. But also, as time goes by, there's more and more data, there's a bigger volume, more data sources to connect. And so then your revenue per customer is almost automatically going to increase. And
Yeah,
so now I'm seeing why the investors are so interested to come in to invest with you. You've got this huge pool for the community, and then it's a super sticky product where the what we call the NRR, the revenue per customer over time, will almost automatically expand. At least that's what I guessed. Is that true? Does the NRR expand?
that's correct.
That's perfect.
We the product we're building. Imagine it's not going to be the most glamorous analogy here, but imagine you're building a new city. And what you need for your city is you need to build sewer in a way,
Yeah.
like basically pipes that are moving water from point A to point B. And you're always going to start with a first neighborhood where you're going to do it. That's your land. And that's the same thing for Airbyte. We are building these pipes to solve one specific problem, one specific use case. And then your city expands. And so the pipes that are moving water in between. And Airbyte, same thing. You add a new pipe, and then you add a new pipe, and then you add a new pipe. And at the end of the day, you have all these pipes that are just being controlled and monitored by the intelligence of Airbyte at that point. And yes, it is a sticky product. And how many times do you see people just redo the sewer and the pipes in a city? Never. It works, and you get water, and you can drink, and that's amazing. And life is beautiful and amazing.
Life is
So
beautiful. Yeah.
and so that's really the same thing when you think about data. Like data is such an important piece of information that company need. Like once the pipe is there, it's really hard to remove. What you can do is you make it better, but removing it is really hard.
So I want to go back to this problem that you had, which is obviously a very, very good problem, but you have just too much inbound and demand from the community, and you cannot even build. You're just focused on the community. There are a lot of open source founders out there, probably on this show, hopefully, and there are more and more open source projects at YC. I think the volume has slightly increased. Obviously, make something people want. I guess is the first step, right? It's something that really solves a huge need. People are just going to come, but probably you have a few ideas or techniques or advice for open source founders on how to get such an excited community about your product. Can you share what you can?
Yeah. So actually, a fun fact here is like during COVID, I think someone in the YC office just struck the want and wrote need.
Oh, that's pretty
Because
cool.
at the end of the
Yeah.
day, that's you want to build a painkiller. Yeah, the thing we've been very realistic with my co-founder is that doing open source is just half the work because and that's why we started to define this concept of like project market fit rather than product market fit. Like a project is a technology that people can use, but you is there still something that you have not proven as part of it? You've proven that you're solving a pain. You've not proven how much that pain is worth. And that's more like in the product market fit category. And and that's why I do a few conferences with YC about open source. If you can, if open source doesn't play a role in your actual strategy and company strategy and product success, don't do open source because it is really hard. Building a community does not happen because you put a project on GitHub. It happened because suddenly, 6 months after you release your product, your team is unable to work on the project because they are working with the community. Like the amount of effort that you need to put in is massive. And there are still things that you have not proven, which is how do you actually monetize that? So that's why it's like only do open source if you know why you're doing it. And for us, for Airbyte, we knew why. The first thing is building data pipelines is always something that happens organically within organizations, meaning that the default is to build, it's never to buy. So when you understand that dynamic here, which is I'm going to build a data pipeline, then I'm an engineer. The first thing I'm doing is I go on Google and I say,
Go
how
on
do I
GitHub.
not build?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How do I not build it, but also how do I not buy it? Well, open source is there. And that was really the strategy for us was open source is here because we want to make sure that the moment someone thinks about it and they go on Google to do it, boom, they find Airbyte, they install Airbyte, and they can be up and running. And yeah, that's like it was part of our adoption strategy. It was part of this ubiquity play because at the end of the day, it's also why would someone contribute to open source if you're downloading, I don't know, like a open source version of Intercom? Why would you contribute? There is no reason. But for Airbyte, it's very different. Every single connectors, like no company can manage 10,000, 20,000 connector. It has to be done by the people who are using it. And that was also the strategy on like, how do we make that community more vibrant and continue to grow and valuable as well, for making it valuable for each other to be part of the community. So you need to have a reason. You don't just do it because you want to call yourself an open source company.
That's extremely smart. Well, again, not surprising seeing who I'm talking to, but yeah, you need an almost infinite number of connectors. And by going open source, the community is going to do the work for you.
They do the work for us, they do the work for themselves.
You're right. That's good. No, it's interesting too. I also want to, you started with this, but I haven't forgotten. It's not make something people want, it's make something people need. So I think together we should go back to YC, to Gary Tan, and I think they should just change that. It's actually even better, make something people need. Many questions come from this one. I'm sure you see some of the new open source YC projects. You go give some talks. Do you actually think some of them are open source for the wrong reasons, or they shouldn't be open source, or there's no point for them to be open source? Do you see that happen?
I see that happen. But I think they also realize it pretty fast because if there is no reason for it to be open source, people might just look at it, play with it, and just stop using it. So I see that. Now I also see projects that are going really well on open source. For me, like the most important one is your audience. If it is engineers, if it is developers,
Yeah.
like if their default for your product is to build, then generally open source is going to be, you have more chances of success with this kind of project. For example, I've seen project to like open source Salesforce. Well, yes, that's a great idea, but who actually uses the product, who actually cares about the product? It's not an engineer, it's a salesperson. And the salesperson doesn't care if a technology is open source. What
They
they
don't
want is to
build,
use,
they buy.
exactly.
Yeah.
They don't build, they buy. And so that's the thing. To me, that's the first thing people need to be thinking about with open source.
That's really cool. I'm hoping a lot of open source founders are listening to this right now. And then it gave me another idea. If you're building something where there's a lot of connectors, then almost, if you want to be one of the, I mean, if having enough connectors is a good selling point, like it is for you, then going open source makes a lot of sense. So I'm even thinking like there's a play to go look at closed source companies that do have a lot of connectors, like Zapier, and then be like, okay, Zapier has thousands of connectors. It took them years and
Mhm.
years and years to get there. Can we do an open source version of Zapier? I actually
Yeah.
think a few
There
people
is one.
tried at YC. Yeah.
There is one that exists actually called N8N or something like that.
I
So
remember seeing one at YC for sure. Yeah. So that's an idea. Maybe it's not Zapier. That was just the idea. So do you think that's a good idea as well? Would you, I don't know if you're investing, but would you invest in that kind of startup?
probably not for connectors, just because we're the one doing connectors. But Mongo, open source company, they never really accepted contributions into the product, but they were open source
Hmm.
because their goal was not so much about contribution and about sharing the load of for solving a real pain. It was really about addressing this build versus buy, which is
Hmm.
an
Yeah.
engineer is going to take Mongo, install it, run it, start an application with it. So at that point, it's just really about removing the friction and being one of the core pillar of the applications that are being built. So it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be because you have like thousands of connectors that you need to build. It's just to me like the root is really this build versus buy and removing friction for people to adopt a new tool that is going to become like the centerpiece of your application.
Makes a lot of sense. I appreciate this perspective. Thank you so much. Of course, always comes the question of monetizing open source. There's not that many anymore, but still some people that say, oh, open source, everything is free. You're never going to make money. Those people I think are disappearing, and you're a perfect counterexample. But there's the typical, and I know you guys do this at Airbyte, there's the typical charge for enterprise, single sign-on, roles, administrators, dashboard, etc. And I believe you do that, but did you find something else, something more original, or is this just enough? Are there other avenues to explore?
Yeah, I mean, open source gets adopted really fast by small teams. That's the thing. And small teams generally don't need to pay for what they use when it's open source. The thing is that team becoming successful? And if so, what do they teach the rest of the organization about what they've built and what tools they've been using? And I think that's the moment when there start to be more scrutiny internally in companies about what technology are you using? What risk are we having? And there is an automatic path to monetization there. But first, you need to be successful within one team. And that's a normal path. If you do things around governance, around security, around user management, like a small team doesn't care about that. But the moment the product starts to be used outside of the team or starts to expand outside of the team, there will be a VP, there will be a CTO, there will be a manager who says, I need these features because the risk is too big. Or it can be, oh, but what happens if this application stops working because Airbyte is broken? What do I do? Do I don't have like data anymore for like 1 month until we figure out what is broken? So that's the place where the moment you become an important technology as part of the company, there is a path to monetization. Now the question is it support? Is it services? Or are you building features on top of it? And initially we went for support, which was an easy way in a way to do it because we're experts in how to operate Airbyte and building products takes time. But with time, we started to go a lot more on the product side. And that is something we've always also been very, very transparent with our community. If you look at, we have this public handbook about Airbyte. We said that our goal with open source was to solve the problems of teams moving data from point A to point B. Everything that is more about organizational pain, governance, security, and like extending the usage was going to be something that people pay for. And we've been always very transparent about that. And I think that has served us a lot. But yes, I think different company will have different avenues. Ask yourself also why people care about open source. Why do people like, is it because it's cheap or is it because it's solving another issue? For us, yes, it was free to use open source, but people were actually solving a real issue, which is a lot of data that they wanted to move, a lot of data that they wanted to access. They could not let a third-party SaaS service have access to it. And Airbyte could be run within their VPC, within their infrastructure, and so like giving them the superpower of a SaaS application. And that was really for us like the moment of, oh yeah, that's where we have our PMF. Now we can touch the data, even the most secure data that organizations have. So healthcare, banks, etc., they're all using Airbyte today.
That's also a big feature of open source is trust and security and safety, and you can have it on your own, deploy on your own machines.
Yeah.
Uh, it sparked a new question again in my head. There's always again this sort of debate or this idea. So many times I've heard open source. So I'm an investor in some open source projects, and sometimes I see projects that I love, and I'm afraid of this. Are you going to become only a dev shop for your big customers and just only do custom? There's a lot of questions, but you mentioned in your answer at the beginning, we start with small companies from the ground up because they want to build with our tool with open source, and then when they become bigger and then when we become critical, we monetize. But there's always this thing of how long do you have to wait until you get 100 startups using your product, and probably 90 of them are going to fail and 9 are just going to survive and just one is going to become big. And you counterbalance that with, I'm actually going to go out and try to sell to bigger customers now. Did you do that? Because again, you went so fast. Was it only small startups going big, or did you actually have an outbound sales motion? And in that
No.
case, it's not the same process, right? You just don't wait for them to grow. Tell me how you think about that.
Yeah. I think it really depends on who your product resonates with. So I cannot say that we had to go search for bigger ones because And that was actually like a bit of a curse of Airbyte is the spectrum of companies that are using Airbyte is extremely wide. We
Mm.
have 1% data consultancy that are using Airbyte. And on the other side, you have the largest media company in the world using Airbyte.
Yeah, that's a lot of
And
different people to serve. Yeah.
exactly. And so at that point, it's just where do we want to focus our monetization effort? Do we go on the left or do we go on the right? Well, for us, the question is obvious. We're going to focus on the right. But at the same time, open source will continue to serve people who just don't want to be paying for software. And maybe at some point they will, or maybe they will work with a customer that want to pay us. So that I think at that point it really depends on, and I think we're lucky to be like in the infrastructure space for that, where infrastructure doesn't care about whether you are Disney or whether you are like a mom and pop shop. You need a CPU. Doesn't matter. Well, same thing for Airbyte.
That's interesting. So you were lucky enough not to even have to go. Even the big guys came for you. You said something I want to stop on. You said, obviously, was your word. You go with the big. I don't think that's necessarily obvious because it's bigger contract, but it's also more hand holding and support contracts, etc. How did you go and made that decision? Because some companies actually they choose to focus on the smaller side.
Yeah, that's a great question. Give me 1 second.
I try. Yeah, sure. I mean, no, but it's interesting because it's so obvious for you, right? And I
Yeah.
just want to question that. I'm sure there's a, I'm trying to get to also your sort of your reasoning behind it, how you think about, because it's a tough question. And I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs are asking themselves. So, how do you go about thinking this through with your co
Hmm.
founder, probably, maybe with your board or investors to get to an answer? And
Yeah.
I'm not, maybe there's no perfect answer, but you chose one. And so I want to understand how you got there.
Yeah. So I think it really comes back to how we were thinking about open source adoption, which is we don't want open source to ever be a toy. And you have a lot of companies sometimes they start focusing on monetization and open source becomes like a toy or like a demo of the product. And for me, like when I was thinking about, okay, we have this core layer of Airbyte that is the open source piece. Who will these additional features that we're building on top of it resonate the most with? And it's not going to be the smallest company in the world. If you are like a startup just out of YC, what do I care about having multiple users? I'm just going to have my, I don't know, beta at airbyte.io, and everyone in the data team is going to be using that. Doesn't matter. But when you start going into these companies that have a lot more scrutiny around security, around governance, like that's the people we wanted, like that's the company we wanted to start building that layer of feature for, because they need it. And we were already fulfilling the need of smaller companies. And at that point, it was just, okay, now let's build a feature that we monetize on and let's focus on and let's build it for the company that need that type of feature.
It's interesting. I think maybe my question was not that good because I think you're right. Your answer is pretty obvious. The open source will be enough for the small companies, and so you. It means what I'm understanding from your answer. I think if you're open source, you almost always have to sell to the quite big companies because they're actually the only ones that need single sign-on and roles and users and stuff. Because if you're, like you said, if you're a YC company, you just, even if you have 2 or 3 users, you have the same email and that's it. So you're forced as an open source company to sell to big
Yeah,
companies, I guess. It's interesting.
yeah,
I never saw it that way. And so I want to go back to a question that I had with a startup. With I remember one startup specifically. How do you make sure you remain a scalable company and not become just a dev shop for your top three biggest customers? Like, how do you make sure of that?
yeah. I think here it's really about what is the value proposition that you have, and what is, I think it's really about, I mean, you're going to do some unnatural thing anyway whenever you onboard a new customer because they have needs that you probably are not fulfilling. The question is, can it fit in your, does it fit in your company vision or not? Like if you're doing, like typically if someone was buying Airbyte and say, "Oh, Michel, we actually can you build a data warehouse?" I said, "No, I'm not gonna do that. It's not what I'm. It's not the value I'm providing." So I think this is a place where, as founder, as sales, as product, you need to have, in a way, like a boundary around what you want to do. And someone recently said, "Oh, Michel, we need an SAP connector for an old version of SAP." And at that point, I'm thinking, okay, with the customer asking for that, how much are they willing to pay for that? Does it fit with my vision, with my mission as a company? My mission as a company is every single company in the world should be able to make any data that they have actionable and available.
So
Well,
yes, I'm guessing.
so yes, and I
Okay,
do it.
interesting.
Exactly. And so I think it's this type of like core principle that you need to have, which is that unnatural thing that people are asking me to do, completing and in line with the vision that I have and the mission that I have for the company? Or is it something that has nothing to do with it? And at what point I will say no.
It's super interesting. Do you think you will use that old SAP ever again, or do you think it's just for that single customer, probably?
No, we have two other people using it.
Okay. So that's also my intuition was if you think you can build it once but sell it multiple times, you're not really a dev shop. But has
Correct.
there been times where they ask you to maybe it fits the vision, it's about connecting, but it's like a super obscure thing, like very old version of SAP from like 10 years ago that you're sure nobody else will ever use. Would you do that? Depends on the
Probably.
price, right?
Exactly. At the end of the day, it also depends on the price because the price also tells you, gives you a sense of how critical that connector is.
Yeah,
So yes, I would do it if
interesting.
the price is there.
Very, very cool. Okay. I want to go into a very different direction for the little time we still have together. So again, thank you so much for taking the time. I don't know if you want to share how many people you have in the company, but let's say you have a reasonable amount of people for the size, valuation, but also revenue wise. What's your sort of thought on the quote unquote hiring freeze? We see all those companies who don't hire anymore because they just empower their existing teams with AI tools just to allow, for example, developers to allow them to do more work with AI assistants. Did you see that happen in your company? Have you hired in the last, year? And have you
Yeah.
implemented a lot of AI tools inside the company?
Yeah. So we continuously hire, but it is true that I'm putting a lot of, I'm tr- every company needs to be creating scarcity somewhere. Like innovation, a lot of innovation comes from scarcity. If people start having too much, they become completely full and they stop moving. So you need to have scarcity. And I was just talking this morning with my VP finance about a painful thing that they have to do and say, yeah, let's investigate. Is there an AI tool that can do it for us? It used to be a very manual process. So we'll see. We looked at a few tools, but yes, if people feel like they're stretched too thin, if you've brought the right people into your organization, they will look for a way to free up their time so that they can do other things. And they will look at the low-hanging fruit of tasks that can be given to an AI application. Actually, we had a hack day 3 weeks ago, and we started to use this AI agent going over our GitHub repository, and we say, "Hey, can you upgrade the like 300 of these connectors? We need to upgrade the CDK that it's using. We need to run the test. We need to do all these things, and it has to be separate uh, pull request. It has to have a change log, etc., etc." The guy just wrote it into his terminal, and boom, you have a junior engineer doing like hey, it's a boring task. Like nobody wants to do it, but if it's not a machine, a human has to do it. And so yes, and scarcity leads us to this kind of discovery and tool adoption.
It is so interesting because I believe your answer is almost not AI related. I think it's much more, profound and deeper than that. It's about scarcity. And I think it's scarcity forces you to innovate or forces you to become resourceful. And it's something I see so many times. It's actually something I've been told when I was a very young entrepreneur, and I believe very deeply. So it's so interesting. I couldn't agree more. It's when you don't have any other choice and when you don't have millions of dollars to spend, you have to be creative. Scarcity or effort or constraint fosters creativity. We saw the DeepSeek R1 model, and they innovated on so many fronts. They replaced CUDA with a more efficient language just because they had scarcity, they had constraints. So
Yeah.
that's so fascinating. And then I'm just thinking, by saying, I'm like, this is a company that went from zero to raising hundreds of millions in a couple of months. How can you? It's so impressive that you remain in this mindset of scarcity where I'm guessing, I have no information, but I'm guessing you have tens, if not hundreds of millions in your bank account ready to be spent, and you're being very thoughtful about that. Doesn't that drive you crazy? Don't you want to sometimes just throw money at a problem?
Of course. Who doesn't want to do that? Yes, and we do it sometime, but we do it with, we think about it when we do it. Uh, that's such a good, yeah, 100%. Like the good thing is having that treasure chest allows us to sometimes take shortcut where, well, let's throw money at the problem. But it is something that where we are being very thoughtful about. I prefer that someone introduces a sourcing application AI based into the recruiting team than saying, oh, sourcing takes us so much time, let's hire a sourcer. Like, I want us to start looking at technology before we throw money at the problem because technology scales. Like, if you start throwing money at the problem, you will end up to a point where one, you don't want to invest there anymore. So you're stuck with, and here I'm talking about people, but it can be like, it can be something else than people where you're stuck with
Outsourcing.
this
Yeah.
outsourcing or something else. You're stuck with something that in a way, you've bought, but that is not scalable. So it means
Mm.
that you need to continue to invest in it for it to continue to grow and handle the usage rather than having to pay for an application that can scale infinitely.
It's so interesting. I was talking with Wayne Crosby on this podcast a few weeks back. By the time this is published, I think Wayne's episode will be published as well. So he's a ex visiting YC group partner, founder of Google Slides. And he said when you started a business before, you needed capital for two things: to buy what you're selling and human capital. And with the internet in the last 20, 30 years, you don't need to buy stuff to sell. You can sell stuff online. You just need humans. And he said now with AI, you don't even need humans anymore. You just need ideas. And it goes back to what you're just saying. Humans don't scale, or they do if you bring more humans and it costs more. But
Yeah,
technology is sort of the ultimate solution. So it's interesting that you're thinking about it this way. It means you're building probably the ultimately scalable company. Do you see yourself, I don't know, doing 10x this revenue with almost the same amount of people?
I think so.
Very
Pretty,
exciting.
pre-
So
pretty sure we will.
so exciting. So this is perfect. Brings me to one of my last questions. What's the future for Airbyte? What are you excited about right now? What are you building? What's coming? Give us a little teaser.
Yeah, I think what we have right now with Airbyte is we have a extremely hard to reproduce asset, which is our little octopus is a good representation of what Airbyte is. It's has tentacles and it can touch everything. And that's really the asset we build with Airbyte. We have a well-oiled machine to touch data everywhere. Now the question is, what comes next? What comes above that? Because what we've solved is the diversity of sources of data. We've built support for the diversity of shape of data. And right now we're about to release the diversity for the location of data. So how do you move Airbyte as close as possible to the data? The thing we've also done to make that octopus so smart is we've added like what we call the AI builder, which is how do you bring an agent to start understanding how to pull data out of a system.
Yeah.
Now, what are the next agent that we're building on top of it? And to me, that's what's coming. It's gonna be a it's gonna be a fun year.
I was going to say it's sort almost sounds obvious that you want to build some AI on top, maybe to figure out the data, maybe to help you use it. So yeah, you're right. You have a pretty interesting moat. It's a data moat. You're connected everywhere. You have all your customers. I didn't realize it was an octopus, to be honest, but now I see it. So thank you for making
It's
that.
touching and it has a big brain.
Okay, hopefully like you. Okay, that's awesome. Is there a book that you can recommend to us? I'm an avid reader, so I always ask the question: a book that had a big impact on your life, could be personal or professional.
Yeah, I always go back to the same one. It's the one called I Output Manager from Andy Grove. And
Okay.
it's very funny because when you read it, you're just, okay, the guy is talking about a factory doing omelets. How does that, or CPUs, how does that relate to engineering and software companies? The Yeah, it was one of my favorite book that I've ever read. It's just how do you build a team that is highly efficient? How do you keep track of things that are happening? How do you reorganize like horizontal, vertical as you're going through different phases of growth? Every time someone becomes a manager at Airbyte, I give them the book because it is also the one that when you're an engineer and or like when you're an IC and you become a manager, all your mechanism for knowing if you're doing a good job are broken. Because when you're an IC, you push a PR, the project goes live, and boom, that's your satisfaction, your internal satisfaction. When you're a manager, and I'm going to take engineers because that's what I'm the most familiar with, if you go down that path, you will be missing something because at that point, the way you measure your success is not about how much code you're pushing. It's about how much code your team is pushing. So there is like this extra layer, like derivative happening, and that's how you need to be. If like your success is the success of your team, and the moment you start thinking about it this way, now you understand what you need to do for your team to make it successful. So a beautiful book. I love it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I didn't know about it. I'll add it to my list for sure. Thank you so much for being here. Before we leave, if people want to find you, follow you online, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I try to push articles from time to time about the company, about the product, about the market. Otherwise, airbyte.com and join my Slack community or GitHub. Love to chat with people.
Amazing. Michel, thank you so much for being here today and being so generous with your time. I had a blast.
Thank you, Gabriel. I had a blast as well.
Awesome. And to our listeners, if you're still here, you should, because it was a fascinating conversation. Please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. It really does help. If you're on YouTube, you can see our nice faces. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified about the next video. Until next time on the Lobster Talks, I will see you. Thank you so much. Bye.